Okay, so you sent over some articles about migrants, being bused all over the U.S. I mean, we're talking like families getting off these buses after,
Hmm.
days of travel, and they just end up in these cities they don't even know with like nothing but the clothes on their backs.
Yeah.
It's a lot. It's really something. So I guess let's just dive right in.
Yeah, you're right. It's complicated, and these bus trips we're talking about, they're really just like the tip of the iceberg, you know? We're looking at like this whole clash of, the different priorities and policies, and it's just, I don't know, just people caught in the middle.
Yeah, it's definitely more than just moving people around, right? Like we see Governor Abbott and Governor DeSantis, they're all over the news with this whole thing about the buses and saying like their states are overwhelmed and this is all they can do.
Right, and that's where things get, well, that's where it gets interesting. Their whole argument is about these sanctuary cities. They're talking about like DC and New York City and Chicago, these places that have, like policies about not working with like federal immigration stuff.
So it's like they're saying, oh, you want to be a sanctuary city? Fine. But you have to deal with all these people coming in.
Yeah, exactly. It's a way to kind of like force those cities,
Yeah.
to like put pressure on them. And you could say it's a way for them to, score some political points by making immigration seem like this big problem. But really, like when you look at what's happening, it's way more complicated than that.
Speaking of complicated, I saw one article, I think it was originally in Spanish, and it used the word revenge to talk about these buses.
Hmm.
I'm not saying that's the right way to think about it or anything, but it just makes you think about this whole thing differently.
It does. It makes you think whether it's like some political strategy or people crying out for help, or even if it's like an act of revenge.
Mhm.
It just shows how important this is and how divided everyone is about immigration in this country.
It also makes you wonder, like, are these buses actually doing what they're supposed to do? Or are they just creating a bunch of new problems? Like, I've seen reports about how New York City is having a really hard time with old people coming in. Shelters are overflowing and people are getting really stressed.
Yeah.
It just seems like it's going to be a disaster.
Yeah, and that's something else we have to look at. Like, what happens because of all this? You have New York City, this place that's known for being really diverse and welcoming, and now they just don't have enough resources for everyone. It's not just New York either. It's happening in other cities too.
This is like real life stuff.
Yeah.
It's not just some policy debate. But before we get into all that, can we talk about the whole sanctuary city thing? What does that even mean? Like, what are they actually doing differently?
Yeah, so sanctuary city, it's not like an official thing. There's no like law that says what it is. It's more like a way to talk about cities that don't want to help the federal government with immigration stuff.
Okay, so like, what do they actually do? What are some examples?
It depends on the city,
Hmm.
but usually it's things like they won't keep someone in jail just because immigration asks them to.
Yeah. You mean like when immigration says, hey, we want to talk to this person, don't let them go yet?
Exactly. It's called a detainer request. So say someone gets arrested for something small, like a broken taillight or something, and they're supposed to be let go. Immigration can send a request to the jail to hold that person even longer, like even if they could be out on bail, just so immigration can come and talk to them.
And sanctuary cities are like, nope, we're not doing that unless you get a judge to sign a warrant.
Exactly. Some cities also won't let their police share information with immigration, or they say immigration can't do certain things within the city limits.
Interesting. So they're like setting boundaries in a system that everyone says is way too harsh,
Yeah.
especially for people who are just trying to, escape really bad situations.
Yeah.
And that's where these buses come in.
Right, because no matter what you think about immigration, these are real people who have been through a lot. The stuff
Mm.
you sent me really showed that.
Yeah, one article, I think it was in Spanish, and talked about this young mom. She gets off the bus with her two little kids. She's just exhausted. And she has no idea where they're even going to sleep that night.
Like,
It just makes you think about like the human cost of all this political stuff,
and that's just one story. There are thousands more. We have to remember these bus rides are just the end of a really long and dangerous trip for these people. They're running away from violence and poverty and all kinds of bad stuff. They're risking their lives for a chance at something better.
And that bus ride can be like a whole day long, sometimes even longer. And it's not always,
Yeah.
the best conditions.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine how they must feel after everything else they've been through.
Totally. And a lot of them are dealing with some serious trauma on top of everything else. We're talking kids who have seen terrible things, families getting separated along the way. That stuff stays with you. It makes it so much harder to adjust to a new place, new language, new everything.
It's really sad. And it makes you wonder, like, what makes people go through all that? What makes them leave everything they know and risk everything just to come here?
That's a good question. The articles you sent, they talked about a lot of reasons why people are leaving. Like there's so much corruption in their home countries.
Hmm.
And gang violence is out of control. Their economies are falling apart. They can't even get basic things they need to survive. For a lot of them, it's really about survival.
And it's not just like one type of person either, right? It's families, young people, even little kids. They all have their own reasons for coming here.
Exactly. And it gets even more complicated because we have to think about how the United States plays a role in all of this. Like sometimes our policies actually make things worse in those countries that people are trying to escape.
So we're talking about like this whole web of global problems.
Yeah.
But let's go back to the people who are already here. They get here with almost nothing, and then they have to deal with a whole new set of problems. And like one of the biggest hurdles is trying to get asylum right. I read this article. It was in Spanish originally. And it was saying that some people are told it's going to be super easy to become a citizen, like they're promised this fast track, but it's not even close to that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really important thing to understand. Getting asylum here, it's not easy at all. It's not like you just show up at the border and say, hey, I need asylum, and that's it. There are all these rules about who can get asylum, and the whole process takes a really long time.
So on top of everything else these people have been through, now they have to deal with this whole other battle with the legal system.
Yeah.
And they don't have a lot of money or speak the language, and they might have the wrong idea about how it's going to go.
Exactly. And that makes them easy targets for people who want to take advantage of them. You know, there are people out there who see these migrants as a way to make a quick buck. We saw it in those articles you sent. People charging crazy fees for legal help that they don't even give them or promising them jobs that don't exist just to exploit them. That's awful. It's especially hard to think about the kids who are stuck in the middle of all this. It makes you feel like the system is broken, like it's failing the very people it's supposed to help.
Yeah, it's a tough thing to think about, but it's the reality. We can't ignore it. This whole situation with the buses, it's not sustainable. We can't just keep sending people around the country like that and pretend everything is okay. It's a symptom of a much bigger problem.
So what do we do? How do we even start to fix this? It's so complicated. It's definitely not easy. The articles you sent, they talked about some things we could do, like changing our immigration laws so they make more sense for what's happening now, and trying to fix the problems in those countries so people don't feel like they have to leave in the first place, and making the asylum process more humane and efficient. But that's all really hard stuff. It takes a lot of political will, and people have to be willing to change.
I get it. It's easy to feel like you can't do anything when it's this big.
Yeah, but even though it feels impossible, we can't forget that change can happen in small ways too. Like even just learning about these issues and talking to people who have different opinions than us and telling our politicians what we think they should do about it and supporting organizations that are already helping, those things all matter.
It's like, yeah, this whole thing might feel really far away to some people, but the choices we make, they actually affect real people's lives. This deep dive has been really something else I've learned a lot and has made me think about things differently.
Yeah, me too.
This deep dive is just the beginning.
Yeah.
We're just scratching the surface here. But hopefully it's made some people stop and think and maybe even get a little angry. But most importantly, I hope it makes people want to do something. Because behind all the news stories and the politics, there are real human beings.
Yeah.
And they all have their own story. And they all deserve to be treated with kindness and respect. So what are you going to do?